Welcome to the Bogosity podcast for the 15th of August 2011, the podcast that pulls the wool back off of your eyes. This is your host, Shane Killian. Let's rattle the cage of the news of the bogus. It's always hard to imagine government being an even bigger busybody than it is. Unfortunately, we don't have to. Government is always ready to step forth with a bigger example. Case in point, a new law in Tennessee which has made it illegal to post a picture that, quote, causes emotional distress. What? Yes, a law against a stalker causing someone emotional distress in person or over the telephone has been extended from stalking to posting a picture to Facebook or your blog. And not only could someone be held criminally liable and face community service or even jail time for violating this law, the so-called victim could also sue you, even if they found the picture completely at random. Think about what this could apply to. Drawings of Muhammad, the Christ in urine photograph, anything attacking the religion or politics of others. Even political cartoons could run afoul of this law. But it gets worse. The law also requires, quote, if any electronic communication service provider operates a website that offers a social network service and the electronic communication service provider provides services to consumers in this state, any log files and images or communications that have been sent, posted, or displayed on the social network services website and maintained by the electronic communication service provider shall be disclosed to any governmental entity responsible for enforcing this hideous attack on our basic First Amendment rights. And guess what? There's a provision for them to do it without a warrant. All they have to do is have, quote, specific and articulable facts showing that there are reasonable grounds to believe that the contents of an electronic communication or the records or other information sought are relevant and material to an ongoing criminal investigation, blatantly violating the Fourth Amendment as well. Unbelievable. Here's hoping there's swift action to get this thing to court so it can be shot down like the incredible abrogation of liberty it so clearly is. Over the years, many people in foreign countries have criticized the United States, and rightly so, for suppressing scientific findings that are uncomfortable to politicians. But what if those findings are in a different country? It seems that no one wants to talk about them, just like no one except one article in the Vancouver Sun seems to be talking about the Canadian government silencing a scientist who may have discovered why salmon are disappearing off of Canada's west coast. Christy Miller published a paper in the journal Science showing that the salmon may be dying off not due to environmental pollution or overfishing, but to genetic characteristics related to a viral infection. What this means is, well, no one in the press is really saying. The reason why is that the Canadian government has barred Miller from giving any interviews about it. After Science published the article, they found it so significant that they notified over 7,400 journalists about the study, recommending that they set up interviews with her. But the Privy Council office has prevented her from giving any interviews at all and even stopped a news release from her department about the study. Miller has been completely barred from talking about the results of her study with anyone, even though it's already been published. This has been soundly criticized by her fellow scientists, such as Jeffrey Hutchings at Halifax's Dalhousie University, who said, quote, there is no question in my mind it's muzzling. When the lead author of a paper in Science is not permitted to speak about her work, that is suppression. There is simply no ifs, ands, or buts about that. Miller isn't alone. The Canadian government is silencing the work of all sorts of different scientists about fish stocks, air pollution, and food safety. Hutchins had told the Vancouver Sun, quote, an iron curtain has been draped over communication of science in the last 5 to 6 years. According to the Privy Council office, quote, Fisheries and Oceans Canada is conscious of the requirement to ensure that our conduct does not influence and is not perceived to be attempting to influence the evidence or course of the inquiry. But Hutchins disagreed, saying that it is, quote, inconceivable that the Cohen Commission would have viewed the communication of brand new scientific information as somehow interfering with its proceedings, and that their treatment of Miller is, quote, all about control, controlling the message, and controlling communication. The information has already been published, but unless you're an expert, it can be hard to make sense of peer-reviewed scientific articles, so journalists rely on interviews with the paper's authors to enlighten them as to what the paper says and what it means. It's an outrage that they aren't being allowed to do that. But what's an even bigger outrage is that there seems to be no outrage about this at all. The one thing proponents of government education have to do is try and distract people from the success of charter schools, which work by giving real choice to American families. And perhaps no charter school has come under more fire than the Harlem Success Charter School in New York City. We're told that these schools have poor performance and that children would be better off in government schools. Not according to the New York State Assessment Program. As reported in the Wall Street Journal, Harlem Success consistently outperforms the New York City's government schools across the board. At city schools, only 60% of 4th, 5th, and 6th graders pass the math exam. At Harlem Success, that percentage is 94%. In language arts, 78% of charter school students passed, compared with only 49% of the government schools. And even when you look at minorities, 94% of black and Hispanic students at Harlem Success pass their grade level, compared with only 73% for whites at the government schools. The Wall Street Journal calls these schools the most relentlessly attacked charter schools. Of course, they're most relentlessly attacked by politicians and teachers' unions who are threatened by the success of these schools. They're not relentlessly attacked by parents and students who show up in droves each year hoping to win a lottery that will make sure their children will have this opportunity. A lottery that exists because New York caps the number of students in charter schools. Eva Moskowitz, the driving force behind Harlem Success, is trying to alleviate part of that problem by opening up another school in Manhattan's Upper West Side, but is being met with massive resistance. A state Supreme Court judge recently sided with Moskowitz, saying that the decision rests with the state education commissioner and not the courts. But the fight still goes on, being led by Lisa Steglick, who is a parent and also PTA president at a neighboring school. It's clear that the politicians resisting the formation of more of these incredibly successful charter schools care more about their own pet political policies than they do about the education of our children, even theirs. During the campaign, numerous Obama supporters, completely ignoring Obama's record in the Senate, campaigned on his behalf at anti-war rallies, saying he was our only hope for getting us out of war. This is the time where all of those people, each and every one of them, should hang their heads in shame at being so deceived. According to the website iCasualties.org, in the whole of the Afghan war during the Bush years, 2001 through 2008, 630 American soldiers were killed. In just the first 2.5 years of the Obama administration, that number is over 1,100. Hundreds more soldiers killed in 2.5 years that were killed throughout 2001 through 2008. Meanwhile, what's happened to all these anti-war protesters? Used to be before the 2008 election, anti-war rallies would attract dozens of protesters, most of them carrying Obama signs. Now that Obama's president, anti-war rallies seem to consist of just 8 libertarians and a tumbleweed. Michael McPherson, National Coordinator of United for Peace and Justice, says it's all about partisanship. Quote, "Once Obama got into office, they kind of demobilized themselves. Because he's a Democrat, they don't want to oppose him in the same way as they opposed Bush. The politics of it allows him more breathing room when it comes to the wars." Reason Magazine's Ira Stoll pointed out the same problem with the New York Times. When they ran an article showing that civilian casualties in Afghanistan were down, they compared the numbers to 2010, not to any point during the Bush administration. The liberals who screamed about the injustice behind Bush's wars are completely silent as Obama continues to wage them and even makes new war in Libya. All of this allows Obama to wage war with impunity, absent of any real protesting or political pressure, and the result is more American soldiers coming home in boxes. You know, before the 2008 election, someone who looks an awful lot like me and answering to my name predicted that Obama will be just another warmongering, tax, borrow, and spend big government politician. How many times do you have to be right before people start paying attention? Amidst all the cacophony around the debt ceiling increase is something that's getting almost completely overlooked by the news media. It's something that has a far more negative effect on our economy and our society. At the same time our government is whining about losing their AAA rating due to their inability to cut spending, the Obama administration is greatly expanding that most horrendous and ineffectual of all government boondoggles, the war on drugs. Apparently, Obama thinks that if spending tens of billions of dollars every year ends up being a waste of our money, then spending billions more will surely turn it around. To this end, he's expanded the role of the CIA and the military in Mexico, posting them in a Mexican military base where they can work with authorities and continue to fail at fighting the drug cartels. According to Arturo Sarucán, Mexican ambassador to the United States, transnational organized crime can only be successfully confronted by working hand in hand, and the outcome is as simple as it is compelling. We will together succeed or together fail. I don't think anyone's going to be placing bets on the former anytime soon. The only way to eliminate organized crime is to repeal the victimless crimes that aren't really crimes that they operate under, whether it's drugs, prostitution, gambling, or whatever. Fundamentally, these are all voluntary exchanges that harm no one who isn't a willing participant. The harm comes when you make these things illegal and go away when that prohibition is eliminated, exactly like it was with the repeal of alcohol prohibition. Fortunately, Nick Steinberg at Human Rights Watch injected a bit of rationality to the debate. Quote, "The government has argued that the number of deaths in Mexico is proof positive that the strategy is working and the cartels are being weakened. But the data is indisputable. The violence is increasing, human rights abuses have skyrocketed, and accountability both for officials who commit abuses and alleged criminals is at rock bottom." It's also prone to the cascade of failures we see in overseas wars, where military personnel are not given weapons, or if they aren't adequately trained in how to use them. They have to pay for their own helmets and bulletproof vests themselves. They've had to use their own cell phones because they weren't issued police radios. Eric Olson of the Woodrow Wilson Center said that it was like trying to saddle your horse while running the Kentucky Derby. And who wants to bet that we'll see the same war on terror tactics at play here, where suspects are labeled enemy combatants and not given trials or even access to legal counsel? And who wants to bet we'll see the blowback, these strong-arm tactics in Mexico leading only to more terrorist attacks down the road? And none of it will do the first thing to stop people from getting drugs. You know, it's as if the politicians don't really care the first thing about us and are only interested in getting more power and money for themselves and their cronies. Nah, couldn't be. Not in America. And now it's time to downgrade this week's biggest Bogon Emitter. Ever since Standard & Poor's announced they were downgrading the federal government's credit rating, politicians and the news media have gone crazy trying to spin this into not being the fault of themselves and their cronies. Laughably blaming everything from political bias at S&P to the Tea Parties, they just haven't got the idea why S&P is so doubtful about our future, even though they said it directly. Just a couple of examples. First, from President Obama.
We learned that the United States received a downgrade by one of the credit rating agencies. Not so much because they doubt our ability to pay our debt if we make good decisions, but because after witnessing a month of wrangling over raising the debt ceiling, they doubted our political system's ability to act.
No, Obama, that is not what they said. At best, this is a quote mine. They downgraded because the debt agreement, to quote Standard & Poor's directly, falls short of what, in our view, would be necessary to stabilize the government's medium-term debt dynamics. And that they were, quote, pessimistic about the capacity of Congress and the administration to be able to leverage their agreement this week into a broader fiscal consolidation plan that stabilizes the government's debt dynamics anytime soon. So they doubted the government's ability to rein in this ridiculous amount of deficit spending, sending us trillions of dollars further into debt. They also warned, quote, we could lower the long-term rating to AA within the next 2 years if we see that less reduction in spending than agreed to, higher interest rates, or new fiscal pressures during the period result in a higher general government debt trajectory than we currently assume in our base case. It's about the debt, stupid!
The markets, on the other hand, continue to believe our credit status is AAA.
Really? Is that why the Dow has been dropping like a stone ever since the deal was announced? Is that why interest on Treasury securities jumped over 1.5 percentage points in a single day?
In fact, Warren Buffett, who knows a thing or two about good investments, said, if there were a quadruple A rating, I'd give the United States that.
Now, class, what do we call that logical fallacy?
Argument from authority.
That's right. Very good, children.
Last week, we reached an agreement that will make historic cuts to defense and domestic spending. but there's not much further we can cut in either of those categories.
Oh, give me a break. Anyone who looks at the numbers can see that these were not cuts at all. There were reductions in projected future spending, but they were still increases from the current level of spending. You want to cut defense spending? How about ending your precious wars that achieved nothing except making money for your buddies and creating enemies worldwide? And bringing our troops home, not just from Iraq, Afghanistan, and Libya, but from Germany, Belgium, Portugal, the Netherlands, and everywhere else in the world too. And domestic spending? That was something that S&P mentioned directly. Quote, further near-term progress containing the growth in public spending, especially on entitlements or on reaching an agreement on raising revenues, is less likely than we previously assumed and will remain a contentious and fitful process. For another example, CNN didn't do much better than the president.
What we could see is interest rates going up sort of across the board, right? So if you have an adjustable rate mortgage at home, your interest rate could and might likely go up. If you have a car loan, your interest rate could go up. If you have a privately funded student loan, that interest rate could go up.
Yeah, and you know what else will happen? The higher interest rates will actually attract real investors who will use their own money to put liquidity into the market, thereby helping the economy recover. And they'll be investing in firms and industries that actually deserve it, not ones that are cronies to politicians or the ones that got us into this mess to begin with. And hey, after all these years of the Fed trying to push interest rates down to the floor, they might just make their way up to market equilibrium again. One can hope, at least. Of course, these idiots don't have to speculate. They could just read the S&P reports for themselves or listen to John Chambers, the ratings head for S&P. Here he is being interviewed by the Associated Press.
Well, we lowered the rating yesterday to a AA+ on the U.S. government. I think there were two things that motivated the downgrade. First was we took a dimmer view of the political settings in the United States, the governability, not reaching agreement until 10 hours before they had a cash management program. I mean, this is not how most highly rated governments run themselves. And the other thing is, the governability actually particularly pertains to the fiscal stance and the ability to put that on a long-term sustainable footing. And here, the level of debt that the U.S. government has and the prospect of high single-digit of GDP deficits for the next several years is going to put it even to a higher plane, a fiscal trajectory that we think is starting from a weak position and is going to get weaker.
And now you know what most politicians in the press don't seem to realize. It'd be nice if they would just listen for once, but since they haven't, and since they've tried to spin this whatever way they can to avoid accountability and make attacks against their political enemies, they now stand tall and proud as this week's biggest Bogon Emitter. And now it's time to cast a smiting on this week's Idiot Extraordinaire. Michael Egnor is a creationist idiot you probably saw in his starring role in that smash hit movie Expelled, No Intelligence Allowed. He has a blog which is titled, I kid you not, Ignorance. Warning, do not try to read his blog at home. This should only be attempted by trained professional bogologists. Case in point, his recent entry entitled Engineerism. In it, he asserts the following. There are several ways to understand reality. Theology, philosophy, deductive logic, mathematics, science, engineering, humanities, emotion, etc. Each has its proper place. Some folks, usually scientists, assert the superiority of science for understanding truth. However, science can only investigate one aspect of truth, empirically demonstrable facts about nature. That wasn't me ad-libbing, folks. That's exactly what he said. In essence, science is only good for investigating things that can actually be shown to be true or false. Some of you may sense a bait and switch coming. You would be correct. Each discipline investigates different aspects of truth. If I want to know about the motion of planets, science, astronomy, is the best. If I want to know who to marry, emotion and humane insight is best. Yeah, and if you want to know whom to ask about fixing your lousy grammar, an English teacher is best. And now the moment you've all been waiting for. If I want to know ultimate purpose in life, theology is best. Of course, the first thing that should jump into any skeptic's brain here is, this question assumes that there is an ultimate purpose. But how do we know that there is? If anything, it can be demonstrated clearly that there is no such thing. An ultimate purpose, by definition, would end all questioning and evaluation. If you ask people what's the good of something, you can answer that without using theology. What's the good of feeding starving people? They don't die. But that's not an ultimate answer, because you can then ask, what's the good of not dying? One possible answer would be the benefit that their lives can give to others, their family, their businesses, or society at large. But then you ask, what's the good of that? And so on. It's a process of continual evaluation, and although no ultimate goal can ever be reached, it is precisely what has led to our prosperous 21st century society of science and well-being. The desire for an ultimate answer to all of this is the desire to stop asking questions, to stop wanting to learn, to, if accepted by everybody on the planet, bring all of human progress to an abrupt halt. And that is apparently what Egnor wants. In fact, he doesn't even show any understanding about how this process even works. Listen to this. Engineering is much more consistent and foolproof than science. There's much less debate about the specifications for bridge abutments than there is about string theory. What he doesn't seem to realize is, it wasn't always this way. Bridge specifications are the result of lots of scientific examination, not to mention trial and error. The most famous example is probably the Tacoma Narrows Bridge, where winds cause the bridge to warp and sway and eventually collapse. If Egnor's ignorant claim were in any way true, if engineering is, quote, consistent and foolproof, then this collapse never would have happened. But it's because of this collapse, and many other engineering failures as well, that we have the knowledge to make bridges as safe as they are today. The fail quotes continue. If atheists want certainty, there's a whole hell of a lot more consensus about the internal combustion engine than there is about cosmology. Oh, you mean the engine that science taught us how to make? Why does this moron think that he can compare centuries-established science with cutting-edge discoveries and impugn the new discoveries on that basis? How about this statement of incredible idiocy? New atheist credo. Newton's laws of motion are all we need to understand the meaning of existence. Except they've had to be modified as well, haven't they, ignoramus? Einstein had to modify them and show that they only hold true in inertial reference frames. Then quantum mechanics came along after that and further showed Newton's laws to be inaccurate in many different cases. Egnor sure is living up to the title of his blog. He brings the fail home with, but what about dogma? Science is full of it. The scientific method is dogma. But a dogma is something that is unquestioned. As I just mentioned, nothing in science, not even Newton's laws, is beyond question. Egnor keeps desperately trying to bring his idiotic creationist theology into legitimacy and failing miserably. In fact, the only thing he has succeeded in doing is becoming this week's Idiot Extraordinaire. Well, that wraps up this pecuniary edition of the Bogosity podcast. Please visit the forums at bogosity.tv, where you can read the show notes and participate in discussions about these subjects and anything else you like. And if you'd like to participate in the Bogosity podcast, you can send a question, statement, news article, or rant to podcast@bogosity.tv. If you put it in an MP3 file, it just might get played in the podcast. Thank you for listening. Until next time, here's a quote from Martin Cruz Smith. As a novelist, I tell stories and people give me money. Then financial planners tell me stories and I give them money. The Bogosity podcast is licensed under Creative Commons Attribution Non-Commercial No Derivatives 3.0 Unported license.
Bogosity.